Don't go. I was looking at the archives of the Virgil one.
Yeah.
It's really cool, but like for the first 30 minutes, it's just you and Rand like staring into the screen going, I don't think that works. I don't think this is the first 30 minutes of it. Yeah.
This time's a little bit more.
I
I think we had maybe like 5 minutes of it.
That's, yeah.
And we weren't looking at it too much.
But it was still, other than, when you could get past that, that footage still was cool.
I'm gonna check to see if there's a way to download it and edit it down a little bit to get rid of that. I don't know if there was last time, but it's been like 2 years since we've done, it used to be 4 hour maximum per recording, now it's 8, so.
Yes. Technology's a good thing, right?
We're gonna have my mom's in town this weekend, so.
Oh, excellent.
I'll see you all tomorrow.
All right.
Somebody watching.
Oh, I gotta.
But if you're interested, depends on which block, but you can come by my office. See what
Usually, as far as the fruits go, usually like
Yeah, very good. It's all actually, in some cases, yeah, they're all artistic. Sure.
Aristotle.
Aristotle. Aristotle is as far as I know.
Yeah, as far as I know, it was all sort of,
So hard.
especially the Miyamoto ethics was, like, put together or even completely written by his son.
Is that right?
Yeah, the Nicomacheus is.
Right, right.
So it was edited, but it's also like expected.
Wow.
It's not like, and that's a lot of the issue like with Aristotle's writings is they're not entirely, it's kind of like going over a 19.
Yeah.
I really love to, they're not entirely sure that they know Aristotle.
Right.
That are attributed to be collection that was taken by.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be like 30 hours. Yeah, really hard.
Yeah, I tried to read the categories. I read the categories and excerpt from them. And it was just the most, like, it was for metaphysics class. And, like, the first 2 or 3 days was him trying to explain the difference between, like so Aristotle makes a distinction between and so he was like trying to illustrate it to whiteboard.
Yeah.
Basically, almost this way is different from this way. And it's no, like numerically, one equation is just like
I still like Aristotle. Tries to do it.
Plato is like Aristotle still feels like serious philosophy. Plato feels more like literature, and he does kind of come from that. As far as I know,
I guess that's where my knowledge is really it's like totally it's all the basic characters and stuff.
Yeah.
It's a fun movie to watch.
Yeah.
Thinking about how
very
Plato at least is arguments with Socrates.
Oh, but they were like everything.
Giving the rational arguments, the actual methods.
I still haven't actually read through the whole.
The Republicans infuriating.
Yeah, as well as far as just ideas.
Yeah, the ideas and also just the jumps in products. There's no stuff, but the jumps in plot. Because I was actually just reading that study and then talking about capitalism old age and that old age is better he goes back. And then also, well, that sounds really good, but is that actual justice? If you, because said, if you look back, you find that you don't know what you don't know the sacrifices you got. But is that justice? Could it be justice sometimes not do that? To say a crazy person. And so then you can start talking about what is justice, what is civility. It's just the jumps things. Yes, I like, again, I'm not the biggest, I'm not very comfortable with philosophy in general, arguments. It's sort of like math, but actually, it's too fuzzy. I don't enjoy that, yeah, usually, but Aristotle, I like.
Really?
Yeah.
I find Aristotle probably more artists.
But I haven't read any modern philosophy, but I assume that there's philosophy by Plato or Aristotle.
Yeah, pretty much the only thing that lingers in contemporary philosophy from Plato is the problems of forms. So, for Plato, they exist.
Yeah,
Abstract and they still haven't figured that out. There's still, like, my metaphysics professor didn't work in that sound called problem universals. So,
well, that's good.
right, yeah. So it's something sort of related to the categories as well, but not so much.
Whatever you're ready.
But not so much to the extent that I don't know there. So
Fritz started the light feed,
the contemporary.
so we can take the 5-minute sign now.
Where you have the idea of reference, you have instances of reference. You refer to that as there has to be something.
Whatever's right, Charlie. Just stand in here and sort of center. Perfect.
Sorry. Check out
Welcome back. Charlie Kutzko of Winchell Elementary School will be our reader, starting off Book 10.
Book 10. Now beside their ships, the other great men of Achaeans slept night long, with their soft bondage of slumber upon them. But the son of Artus, Agamemnon, shepherd of the people, was held by no sweet sleep. As he pondered deeply within him, as when the Lord Hera, the lovely-haired, flashes his lightning as he brings in on a great rainstorm or a hail incensant or a blizzard at such time when the snowfall scatters on plunge lands or drives on somewhere on earth. The huge edge of tearing battle, such as Agamemnon, or with the beating turmoil in the bosom from the deep heart, and all his wits were shaken within him. Now he would gaze across the plain to the Trojan camp, wondering at the number of their fires that were burning in front of Ilion. toward the high calls of their flutes and pipes, the murmur of people. Now, as he could look again to the ships of Achaean people, he would drag the hair by its roots from his head, looking toward Zeus on high, and his proud heart was stricken. The lamentation now to his mind. This thing appeared to be the best counsel from among men, to see Nestor, the son of Neleus, to see if Nestor with him could work out a plan that would not fail, and one that might drive the evil away from Danaus. He stood upright and slipped the tunic upon his body, and underneath his shining feet he bound the far saddles. Thereafter slung across the tawny hide of a lion, glowing and huge, that swung to his feet and took a spear.
So likewise trembling seized Menelaus. Neither on his eyes had sweet slumber descending settled, for fear that the Argives might suffer some hurt, they who for his sake over much water had come to Troy, bearing their bold attack to the Trojans. First of all he mantled his broad back in a leopard-spotted hide, then lifting the circle of a brazen helmet, placed it upon his head, and took up a spear in his big hand, and went on his way to waken his brother, who was the great king of all Argives, one honored in his own land as a god is. He found him putting the splendid armor about his shoulders beside the stern of his ship, and was welcomed as he came up to him. It was Menelaus of the great war cry who spoke first. Why this arming, my brother? Is it some one of your companions you are stirring to go and spy on the Trojans? Yet I fear sadly there will not be any man to undertake this endeavor, going against enemy fighters to spy on them alone through the immortal night. Such a man will have to be very bold indeed. Then in turn, powerful Agamemnon answered him, You and I, illustrious O Menelaus, have need now of crafty counsel if any man is to defend and rescue the Argives and their ships, since the heart of Zeus is turned from us. For the sacrifices of Hector have stirred his heart more than ours have. No, for I never saw nor heard from the lips of another of a single man in a day imagining so much evil as Hector, beloved of Zeus, has wrought on the sons of the Achaeans, alone being called true son neither of a god nor a goddess. He has done things I think the Argives will remember with sorrow long into the future, such harm as he devised to the Achaeans. But go now, running lightly beside the ships, and call to us Idomeneus and Aias, while I shall go after Nestor the brilliant, and waken him to rise, if he might be willing to approach the sacred duty of the guards, or give orders to them. Above all, these would listen to him, seeing that his own son commands the pickets, and with him the follower of Idomeneus, Meriones. To these above all we entrusted the duty. Then in turn Menelaus of the great war cry answered him, How then do you intend this order that you have given me? Shall I wait where I am with them and watch for your coming, or run after you when I have properly given the order? Then in turn the Lord of men, Agamemnon, spoke to him, Better wait here, so there will be no way we can miss one another as we come and go. There are many paths up and down the encampment. Call out whenever you go, and waken each man to give him your orders, naming him by descent with the name of his father. Give each man due respect. Let not your spirit be haughty, but let it be you and I ourselves who do the work, seeing that Zeus cast on us as we were born this burden of evil. So he spoke, and with careful orders sent off his brother, and he himself went in search of Nestor, shepherd of the people, and came on him beside his own shelter and his own black ship in a soft bed. And his bright gear was lying beside him, the shield and the two spears and the glittering helmet, and by him lay in all its shining the war belt, in which the old man girt himself when he armed for the fighting where men die, leading his own people, since he gave no ground to sorrowful old age. He straightened up and raised his head, leaning on one elbow, and spoke to the son of Atreus and asked him a question. Who are you who walk alone through the ships and army and through the darkness of night when other mortals are sleeping? Are you looking for one of your mules or looking for some companion? Speak, do not come upon me in silence. What would you of me? Then in turn the Lord of men, Agamemnon, answered him, Nestor, son of Neleus, great glory of the Achaeans, you will know Atreus' son Agamemnon, whom beyond others Zeus has involved in hard work forever, as long as life's wind stays in my breast, as long as my knees have their spring beneath me. I am driven thus because the ease of sleep will not settle on my eyes, but fighting and the cares of the Achaeans perplex me. Terribly I am in dread for the Danaans, nor does my pulse beat steadily, but I go distracted, and my heart is pounding through my chest, and my shining limbs are shaken beneath me. But if you are for action, since sleep comes neither upon you, let us both go out to the pickets, so that we may see if they might not have found weariness too much for them, and fallen asleep, and together forgotten their duty to keep watch. There are men who hate us sitting nearby, nor do we know that they might not be pondering an attack on us in the darkness. Thereupon the Gerenian horseman Nestor answered him, Son of Atreus, most lordly, and king of men, Agamemnon, Zeus of the councils, I think, will not accomplish for Hector all his designs and all he hopes for now. I think rather he will have still more hardships to wrestle if ever Archelaus turns again the heart within him from its wearisome anger. Surely I will go with you, and let us also awaken others, the son of Tydeus, the spear-famed, and Odysseus, and Aias, the swift-footed, and the powerful son of Phyleus. But if one were to go also and call these others I speak of, Aias the great, the godlike one, and the lord Idomeneus, why, their ships lie farthest from us, and are not at all close. But beloved as he is and respected, I will still blame Menelaus, even though you be angry, and I will not hide it, for the way he sleeps and has given to you alone all the hard work. For now he ought to be hard at work going to all the great men in supplication. This need that has come in is no more endurable. Then in turn the lord of men Agamemnon spoke to him, Aged sir, other times I also would tell you to blame him, since often he hangs back and is not willing to work hard, not that he shrinks from it and gives way, nor in the mind's dullness, but because he looks to me and waits till I make a beginning. But this time he woke far before me and came to rouse me, and I sent him on to call those you ask after. Therefore, let us go. We shall find these others there with the sentries before the gates, where I told them to form and assemble. Thereupon, Gerenian horseman Nestor answered him, Thus no man of the Argives can disobey him, nor find fault with him whenever he stirs up any of them and gives orders. With this speech he slipped the tunic upon his body, and underneath his shining feet he bound the fair sandals, and pinned about him a great vermilion mantle sweeping in a double fold, with a thick fleece of wool upon it. Then he caught up a powerful spear edged with sharp bronze, and went on his way down the ships of the bronze-armored Achaeans. First he came on Odysseus, the equal of Zeus in council, and Nestor, the Gerenian horseman, wakened him from sleep, speaking aloud, and the wave of the voice swept quick through his hearing, and he came forth from his shelter and called out his word to them. Why do you wander thus up and down the ships and the army alone through the immortal night? What need is upon you? Thereupon the Gerenian horseman Nestor answered him, Son of Laertes and seed of Zeus, resourceful Odysseus, do not be angry, such grief has fallen upon the Achaeans. Come then with us to waken another, for whom it is becoming to deliberate the question of running away or fight. Sure.
And Odysseus, the master strategist, got a shield from his hut and went with them. They came to Diomedes, the son of Tydeus, and found him outside his hut with his gear. His men were sleeping all around him, using their shields for pillows, their spears driven upright in the ground on their spikes. The bronze glittered like summer lightning. The hero was asleep on an ox hide, a bright rug under his head. Nestor woke him, rolling him over with his heel, and scolded, Up, son of Tydeus, are you going to sleep all night? Don't you know the Trojans are encamped on the rising ground close by the ships? Diomedes was awake and up in an instant, and his words flew fast as he said to Nestor, You're tough, old man, and you never quit. Couldn't one of the younger generation make the rounds, waking up captains all through camp? You're impossible, though. And Nestor, the horseman of Gerenia, That was well said, friend. I myself have perfectly good sons, and there are many others who could make the rounds and do the summoning. But we are very hard pressed. It all stands on a razor's edge now for the entire army, ruin or survival. Now go rouse swift Ajax and Meges, if you really feel sorry for me. Thus spoke Nestor, and Diomedes threw over his shoulders a tawny lion skin that reached to his feet. Grasping his spear, he went off to rouse and fetch the warriors. When they joined the sentinels, they found them wide awake, crouching down with their gear. Dogs will watch a sheepfold all night long with bloodshot eyes, but when they hear a predator approaching through the woods, and then the noise of men and hounds around it. Their sleepiness completely disappears. So too these human eyes, as the sentinels kept watch through the night, turning toward the plain over and over again whenever they thought they heard Trojans coming. It warmed Nestor's heart, and the old man encouraged them with winged words. Just so, my boys, keep your watch, stay awake, or we will become sport for our enemies. And he hurried on through the trench, followed by all the captains summoned to this council, and by Meriones and Nestor's glorious son, whom they invited also. So they went through and up from the trench and sat themselves down in an open spot where the ground was clear of dead bodies, the very spot where Hector had turned back from slaughtering the Greeks when night enfolded him. Sitting down there, they held council, and Nestor began. Well, my friends, is no one man enough to go among the Trojans and take captive some straggler, or otherwise overhear what the enemy intends? Will they stay put out here by the ships, or withdraw to the city now that they have beaten the Achaeans back? A man might learn all this and return unscathed, and his glory among men would reach the sky. And he would get gifts from every leader commanding ships here, from each a black ewe with a lamb beneath. What could be finer? And he would forever be invited to feasts and to drinking parties. He finished, and they were hushed in silence. Then Diomedes rose to the occasion. Nestor, my pride as a man urges me to go into the enemy camp over there. But if another were to go with me, it would help, and I would be more confident. When you work as a team, your partner helps see what will work out best. Solo you might see, but not as much, and you're short on wits. There was no shortage of volunteers to accompany Diomedes. Both Ajaxes were ready, those servants of war. Ready was Meriones, and Nestor's son. Ready Menelaus, the son of Atreus, and Odysseus, who could endure anything. Ready to infiltrate the Trojan lines. Then the warlord Agamemnon spoke out. Diomedes, son of Tydeus, dear to my heart, choose as your comrade whomever you want, the best of all these who put themselves forth. Do not, out of deference, choose a lesser man and leave a better behind, deferring to birth and seniority, even if one is more royal. In truth, he was afraid for red-haired Menelaus. Diomedes, good at the battle cry, said, if you really want me to make my own choice, how can I pass over God like Odysseus, who has what it takes for any kind of work, the heart, the courage, and is Athena's friend? If he goes with me, we could make it back through blazing fire. He doesn't miss a thing. And Odysseus, who had endured many campaigns, Diomedes, don't overrate my merits or my faults. You're talking to Greeks who know what's what. We'd better head out. It's very late, getting on toward dawn. The stars have shifted, and more than 2/3 of the night is gone.
Then both men buckled on grim gear of war. Diomedes was given by Thrasymedes a two-edged sword, for his own was at the ship, and a shield too. Upon his head he pulled a bull's hide helmet with no ridge or plume, a so-called cut-down made to guard the skulls of rugged men-at-arms. Meriones handed Odysseus his bow and quiver, gave him a two-edged sword, and fitted on a helmet that was first a cap of hide with bands of leather crisscrossed, and on these a boar's white teeth were thickly set, disposed with cunning on all sides. A felt lining padded the cap. This helm Autolycus brought in the old days out of Ilion, where he had made a breach in the palace wall of Amintor, the son of Ormenos. He gave it to Amphidamas, the Cytheran, Scandia-bound. Amphidamas, in return for hostility, gave it to Molos, and Molos handed it on to his own son, Meriones, to wear in battle. Now it capped Odysseus' head. Grimly accoutred, The two moved out into the darkness, leaving all their peers behind. Off to the right, along their path, Pallas Athena sent a heron gliding down the night. They could not see it passing, but they heard its cry, and heartened by the fisher bird, Odysseus prayed, "O child of Zeus, who bears the storm cloud, hear me. In hard hours, ever at my side, you follow every move I make. Tonight, befriend me most, Athena. Before we two retire on the ships, let us bring off some feat to gall the Trojans." In his turn, Diomedes heard the war cry, prayed, "O tireless one, hear me as well. Be with me, as with Tydeus once, my father, when he advanced as messenger to Thebes, ahead of all Achaeans, left the Achaeans on the Asopos River under arms. His word to the Cadmeans were like honey, but terrible were the actions he devised. As he withdrew, bright goddess, with your blessing. Now in the same way, bless me, guard me now. For my part, I shall offer at your altar a virgin heifer, a yearling never yoked, her horns all sheathed in gold." These were their prayers, and Pallas Athena, Zeus's daughter, heard them. Falling silent after invoking her, they made their way like lions through black night toward kills and carnage, braving spears and blood. Neither were Trojan leaders permitted sleep by Hector, but he called them all together, all who were lords and captains of the Trojans, to put his plan before them. "Who volunteers to undertake this mission and see it through? For a great prize. He will have satisfaction, a chariot and 2 mettlesome fine horses, best of those beside the Achaean ships, for the man who dares to win fame for himself by a night patrol along the ships to learn if they are guarded as before. It may be the Achaeans were so battered by our charge that now they talk of sailing, and are so wary that now they have no will for a night watch." The listening Trojans all grew mute and still. Among them there was one by the name of Dolon, rich in gold and rich in bronze. This man was heir to the great herald Eumedes, and a good runner. Puny though he seemed, an only son with 5 sisters. He spoke before the Trojans in response to Hector. "Hector, only lift up your staff and swear that my reward will be that team and brazen car that bear the son of Peleus. For my part, I take oath not to be blind on this patrol or let you down. I'll make it straight through all the camp until I reach the ship of Agamemnon. There the Achaean captains must be debating battle or retreat." Hector complied, held up his staff, and swore, "May Zeus and Thunder, consort of Hera, witness this. No other Trojan rides that car. Behind that team, I say that you will do so. It is to be your glory." So he swore, an oath to incite that man, and swore in vain. At once the runner slung his curving bow over his shoulders, and for cloak the skin of a gray wolf. He took a cap of weasel, picked up a javelin, and headed down for the line of ships leaving the Trojan camp. But he would not return with news for Hector. When he had left the troops and tethered horses, trotting eagerly on the seaward path, Odysseus caught sight of the man coming and whispered to Diomedes, "Who is this, now headed towards us from the camp? A scout, a night patrol along the ships, or bent on rifling some dead body, I can't say. Let him just pass into open ground a little, and we can watch him from behind. If he outruns us, once we are in between him and his base, attack with a spear throw, force him on the ships, not to let him cut back to the town." The two conversed in whispers, then lay still, flattened among dead bodies off the path, while the unwary man came running by. But when he passed them 50 yards or so, a field's width, say, a team of mules could plow, being faster at this work than oxen, dragging a bolted plowshare in a furrow, both ran after him. And at the sound of feet, he stood stock still, for in his heart he hoped that at a nod from Hector, fellow Trojans were on their way to fetch him back. Now only a spear throw distant from him, maybe less, he recognized the Achaean enemies and took to his heels. The two veered after him. As when two hounds well trained in tricks of game hang on behind a young buck or a hare through wooded lane, and the quarry races on amid shrieks of dread, so Diomedes and Odysseus, raider of cities, chased their man after they cut him off from his own army. Seaward he fled, and now when he seemed headed straight into the sentry's arms, Athena set Diomedes raging not to give some other lucky Achaean the first shot. By being slow to catch up, poising his lance, Diomedes managed a great burst of speed and called out, "Halt, or else my spear goes through you. Plunging death is coming at my hands. You cannot get away." In fact, he threw, but missed deliberately. The spear had passed above the man's right shoulder and struck fast before him in the ground. In panic fear, the runner tripped and stopped. A chattering noise came from his mouth, and he turned faint and pale. The two men, panting, soon came up with him to pin his arms, but now in tears that he begged them, "Take me alive. I can arrange a ransom. Iron and bronze and gold I have at home, and father will not count the cost if only he knows me safe amid the Achaean ships." The shrewd captain, Odysseus, answered him, "Courage. You need not feel your death so near. Tell me this, though, and plainly. What has brought you out of your camp and this way toward the ships alone by night when others take their rest? Would you despoil some corpse among the dead, or were you sent by Hector to find out our dispositions at the ships, or did you wish to find out yourself?" Dolon replied, his legs shaking under him, "Carried away, I was against my own good sense by Hector. He said Achilles' team would be my prize, his chariot too, all trimmed with bronze. He told me to go through the black night now swiftly passing, and to approach our enemies, to learn if guards are posted at the ships as usual, or if the Achaeans pushed out our hands, are in accord to sail, and, being far gone, in weariness, have no will for a night watch." At this the great tactician smiled. He said, "By heaven, quite a reward was in your grasp. The car and horses owned by the great father, Aeacus, his grandson, that is a fractious team for mortal men to master, not for Achilles, but he was born of an immortal mother. Tell me this now, give me a plain answer. Where is Hector? Where did you leave him when you took this path? His arms, where are they lying? Where are his horses? How have the other Trojans planned their watches and hours for sleep?" Dolon again made answer. "Hector is with his staff, holding a council beside the funeral mound of the patriarch Elos, far from the battlefield. No watches in your sense, sir, are being stood, no sentries chosen to guard the camp. At every fire, the necessary number are awake and keep one another vigilant. Detachments of allies, though, are everywhere asleep and leave the sentry duty to the Trojans. Allies have no families near at hand." The great tactician, Odysseus, said to him, "And how are they encamped? Mixed in with the Trojans or separately? Tell me about each one. I must know this." Dolon replied, "I'll tell you. Nearest the sea are Carians and Paeonies, with Leleges, Caucones, and Pelasgians. Up the Scamander are the Lycians, Mysians, Phrygian horsemen, and Meonians. But why do you question me on these details if you are bent on raiding a Trojan company? Yonder are Thracians just arrived, far out on the left wing, apart from everyone. Their king is Rhesus Aeonides, with horses the most royal I have seen, whiter whiter than snow and swift as the seawind. His chariot is a masterwork in gold and silver, and the armor, huge and golden, brought by him here is marvelous to see, like no war gear of men built but of immortals. You'll take me to the ships now, will you not? Or will you leave me here, bound hand and foot, while you go forward, testing what I told you for accuracy and advantage to yourselves?" Diomedes frowned and looked at him and said, "As I see it, you need not hold this thought of slipping through our hands. Now you are in them. Accurate though your facts may be, suppose we let you go, or let you go for ransom. Later, by God, you'll come down on the ships to spy again, or to make open war. Resign your life now at my hands. You make no further trouble for the Argives." Even as he spoke, the man leaned forward, reaching to touch his chin, beseeching. But he brought his sword blade in a flash down on the nape and severed the 2 tendons. In the dust, the head of the still crying man was muffled. Now they pulled off his cap of weasel skin, his gray wolf jacket, javelin and bow, and Lord Odysseus held these trophies high to Athena, hope of soldiers. He appealed to her. "Joy in this armor, goddess, first on Olympus, first of immortals in our invocation. Give us more luck. Send us against the Thracian bivouac and horses." He rid himself of Dolon's gear by lifting it into a tamarisk tree. He bundled it and made it easier to see by breaking tamarisk shoots and twigs from underneath, so he and Diomedes could not miss it. On their way back in the night now, swiftly passing, onward they pressed now, bearing spears and blood, and came soon to the bivouac of Thracians at the camp's edge. Here weary troops were sleeping, armor beside them canted on the ground in 3 well-ordered rows. The chariot teams were tethered, each one near their charioteer, and in the center Rhesus slept. Beside him, snowy horses were tethered by the reins that ran from the chariot rail. Odysseus first distinguished him and whispered, pointing him out to Diomedes, "There is the man. There are the horses Dolon, whom we killed, described. Come put your back in it, your heart. Why stand here in arms for nothing? Go untie the horses, or let me do it while you kill the men." Gray-eyed Athena filled Diomedes' heart with fury. Whirling left and right, he struck, and pitiable sounds came from the bodies, cleft by the sword's edge. Earth ran red with blood as on a flock of goats or sheep, unshepherded and undefended, a baleful lion falls. The son of Tydeus fell upon these Thracians until he had killed 12. And at his shoulder, Odysseus, adept at war, moved up to drag out by the heels each man he killed, thinking by this to save the beautiful horses from shying at the bodies when they passed, being unused to dead men yet. When Diomedes reached the Thracian king, he took a 13th precious life away. As the man gasped in sleep, nightmare upon him. Meanwhile, patient Odysseus freed the horses, hitching them together by the reins, and drove them off. He used his bow to whack them, missing the whip fixed in the painted chariot, ready to his hand. With a low whistle, he made Diomedes look, but Diomedes waited, pondering what next to try in the way of outrage. Would he lift the pole and pilfer the king's chariot with his weapons, or take the life of still more Thracian men? His heart dissented at the thought, when near him out of the night air turning, Athena stood and said, "No, put your mind on getting back to your own camp, son of a great-hearted Tydeus, unless you choose to run for it, supposing some other god may wake the Trojans now." Diomedes respected the goddess' voice and turned to mount the chariot. Odysseus used his bow for whip, and off they went to the ships of the Achaeans.
Apollo had not maintained a blind watch, so he saw Athena with Tydeus' son. Furious, he entered the Thracian campsite and waked Thracian counselor Hippocoon, Rheus' brother. He rose from where he slept, saw the empty space where the horses had stood, and heard slaughtered men gasping for last breath. He wailed, shouting his dead brother's name. A clamorous throng of curious Trojan warriors gathered so they could see the terrible deeds that 2 men nearing the Greek ships had wrought. At the place where the Greeks had killed Hector's spy, Odysseus halted the fast-running horses. Tydeus' son jumped down for the bloody spoils, handed him to Odysseus, and then remounted and clucked to the team. They willingly raced as if their hearts yearned to be at the ships. When Nestor heard their distant hoofbeats, he said, "O friends, leaders and chiefs of the Greek force, am I deceived, or do I speak the truth? Thunder of fast horses falls on my ears. If only Odysseus and Diomedes are driving round-hoofed Trojan horses here. but I have a nagging fear that they have suffered under Trojan assault. 2 of our best. He was still speaking as the pair drove up. Both jumped to the ground, where happy comrades greeted and welcomed them with shouts of approval. The old horseman, Nestor, wondered aloud, "Tell me, honored Odysseus, Achaea's glory, did you seize this team inside the Trojan camp? Or did you meet a god who gave them to you? The horses you drive are radiant as the sun. I have often mixed with Trojans in battle, though I am old, rather than stay at my ship, but I have never seen or heard of such horses, so I would say you received them from a god. After all, you two are favorites of Zeus and Zeus's daughter, gleaming-eyed Athena." Canny Odysseus responded to him, "Ah, Nestor, Neleus' son, pride of Achaea, if a god were so minded, he could give even finer horses, mighty as gods are. But these you ask about had just arrived with a Thracian king when valiant Diomedes killed him, and no less than 12 of his best men. We killed another man not far from the ships. That one had sneaked out to spy on our army, then report to Hector and his lieutenants." Odysseus then drove the horses through the ditch, laughing, while his fellow Greeks watched and cheered. When the 2 men reached Diomedes' camp, they took tight-plaited reins and tied the team at a manger where Diomedes' horses softly munched honeyed grain, their quick feet still. Odysseus laid Dolan's spoils at his ship's stern, where he planned a sacrifice to Athena. The men waded in surf, splashing off sweat that coated their necks and ran down thighs and shins. As their sweat dissolved into the sea's waves, the 2 adventurers' spirits were refreshed. They climbed in polished tubs for leisurely baths, then each anointed his skin with olive oil and sat to eat supper. Thanking Athena, they poured generous libations of sweet wine. Thus ends Book 10. Book 11. Dawn, after sleeping beside noble Tithonus, stirred to bring men and immortals first light. Zeus sent Strife to the beached Achaean fleet, where she carried her grim ensigns of war. She stopped at Odysseus' cavernous black vessel, the fleet's center. There, her voice could reach both the camps of Telamon's son Ajax and those of Achilles, the fleet's extremes, where they, trusting their might, had drawn their ships. The ominous goddess faced each way and howled, a sound that steeled every Achaean heart, to wage the war, fight Trojans without pause. Indeed, battle then seemed sweeter than sailing the hollow ships back to their fatherlands. Agamemnon ordered the men to arm, and he too clothed his body in warrior's gear. He fastened over his shins a pair of greaves, over his ankles polished silver guards. He buckled around his trunk a breastplate that his guest Kinreus had given him when rumor reached Cyprus that a Greek force and massive fleet would soon embark for Troy. Kinreus wanted to honor the Greek chief. 10 cyan steel bands circled the bronze armor. 20 tin, a dozen finest gold. Purple serpents wriggled toward the neck, 3 right, 3 left, bright like Zeus's rainbows, placed in clouds for men to read as omens. Over a shoulder he hung a sword whose rivets were pure gold. A scabbard covered the blade, a silver scabbard attached to a gold strap. He selected an ornamented shield that bore 10 concentric embossed bronze circles. Between the circles were 20 tin studs, in the center a single round steel plate on which there railed a scowling Gorgon's head, awful to see, flanked by terror and flight. Around the silver strap supporting the shield, a purple snake coiled. Its heads numbered no less than 3, and all grew on a single neck. The king chose a helmet that had 4 crests, horses' tails tossing to promise menace, and lastly he grasped 2 long bronze-tipped spears. As far as heaven Agamemnon's armor glittered, till Hera and Athena thundered to honor the king of gold-rich Mycenae. Each warrior ordered his chariot driver to hold the horses ready behind the ditch. On foot, the heavily armored fighting men poured forward, shouting louder as dawn's glow waxed. The moment the fighters entered the ditch, drivers took their stations behind it. In warriors' hearts, Cronus' son sparked awe by raising red dew, droplets of blood that meant he was about to send Hades many a valiant soul. Where the plain begins its rise to Ilium, Trojans divided behind Hector, Polydamas, Aeneas, honored like a god in Troy, and Antenor's sons, Polybus, Agenor, youthful Acamus, all like immortals. Hector carried a well-balanced round shield, shining like a portentous star near clouds that sometimes shade, sometimes reveal the gleam. So Hector emerged, sometimes from front ranks, sometimes from rear, and when he appeared, his armor flashed like Zeus's midsummer lightning bolts. As when practiced reapers march parallel through a field, cutting swaths upon thick swath till ripened barley or wheat lies windrowed, so then Trojans killed Greeks and Greeks Trojans, but flight never entered any man's mind. The two sides were evenly matched, and like wolves, snarled while strife, sorrow's wellspring applauded. She was the one deity near the fight. All deathless gods but she stayed home at ease, sitting inside the splendid palaces the immortals had built among Olympus's folds. A few berated Cronus' cloud-wrapped son because he wanted Trojans to win glory, but Zeus ignored them all, remained aloof and savored his own overwhelming power, appraising the Trojan city, the Greek ships, the bronze armor of both killers and killed. While dawn continued to brighten the day, missiles flew and countless men fell on both sides until the hour the woodman prepares his meal, deep in the mountains, and rests his arms exhausted from chopping down tree after lofty tree as his hunger for strengthening food increased. When that hour came, the bravest Argives surged, leading the lesser warriors. Agamemnon was first to charge, killing the chief Baenor, then Baenor's aide and driver, Oileus. Oileus had left the chariot to face the Greek who aimed his deadly spear at the Trojan's brow and through. Oileus's visor did not stop the point. It passed through the bone and onto his brain, which bespattered the inside of his skull. Agamemnon left the two where they fell, after he stripped the armor off their chests. His next victims were Antiphus and Esus, lawful and illegitimate sons of Priam, aboard one chariot. The illegitimate drove. Antiphus rode. Achilles once caught these two and bound them with willow shoots in Ida's hills where they pastured sheep. He freed them for ransom, but this time Atreus' far-ruling son embedded a spear above Esus's nipple and swung his sword through Antiphus's ear. He stripped the brothers' magnificent armor, recalling that he had seen them at the ships after Achilles led them there from Ida. As when a lion stumbles on newborn fawns, his mighty jaws easily crush them both, ending their lives as they lie in a nest, not far from the doe, who watches it first, helpless and overwhelmed by fear herself. Then through the dense forest she races away, coat lathered before the beast takes her as well. So Agamemnon then slaughtered these two, while their fellow Trojans ran away, panicked. Pisander and fierce Hippolochus fell next. Their father, fiery-hearted Antimachus, had won Paris' favor and gold rewards when he spoke out against returning Helen. Agamemnon caught the Trojans' two sons riding a single chariot together. The men had dropped the oily leather reins, losing control. The Greek pounced like a lion. Still aboard the chariot, the brothers begged, "Atreus, take ransom! Spare us our lives! Antimachus, our father, possesses treasure, including gold, bronze, and iron well wrought. His generous payment will surely please you if he hears you have captured us alive." So the tearful brothers implored the king, mellow words, but no mellow words replied. So Antimachus fathered the both of you. He urged the Trojan council, when Menelaus arrived as envoy, he and Odysseus, to kill my brother while they had the chance. You will now pay for your father's treachery. With that, Agamemnon toppled Pisander as he lay clutching the spear in his chest. Hippolochus tried to escape, but soon died when Agamemnon severed his hands and head. The head rolled across the plain like a round stone. Wherever fierce skirmish flared, Agamemnon was there to fight and lead bronze-greaved Argives. Foot soldiers slaughtered running foot soldiers. Charioteers killed charioteers, and dust, from horses' hooves that beat the plain like thunder, obscured the glittering bronze. Agamemnon, setting the pace, cut down man after man. As when destructive fire rages through dense woods, driven by whistling winds, The underbrush, all but its deepest roots, incinerates. So then, Agamemnon's sword chopped off heads of panicked Trojans. Confused and driverless, empty chariots clattered down battlefield paths, teams lacking their fallen Trojan charioteers, suited better for vultures now than wives.
But Zeus drew Hector out from under the dust and the missiles out of the place where men were killed. The blood and confusion will Atreides followed, urging Danaus forever onward. The Trojans swept in their flight past the barrow of ancient Iolus, Dardan's son, to the center of the level ground, and the fig tree as they made for the city. And he followed them, always screaming. Atreus' son, his invincible hands spattered with blood, felt. But when they had made their way to Scaean gates and the oak tree, the Trojans stood their ground, and each side incurred the other, while others still in the middle plain stamped like cattle. When a lion coming upon them in the dim night was terrified, the whole herd, while for a single one sheer death is emerging. First the lion breaks her neck, caught fast in the strong teeth, then gulps down the blood and all of the guts that are inward. So Atreus' son, powerful Agamemnon, went after them, killing ever the last of men, and they fled in terror. Many were hurled from when their horses face downward or sprawling under their hands of Atreides, who raged with his spear in forefront. But when he was on point of making his way to the city and the steep wall, the father of gods and a men descending out of the sky took his place along the ridges of Ida, of fountains, and held fast in his hand the thunderbolt he sent on her way Iris of the golden wings with a message. Go on your way, swift Iris, and carry my word to Hector. As long as he beholds Agamemnon and shepherd of the people, raging among the champions and cutting down their ranged fighters. So long let him hold back and urge on the rest of his people to fight against the enemy through his strong encounter. But when either struck with a spear or hit by a flying arrow, he springs up behind his horses. I guarantee power of Hector to kill men. Till he makes his way to the strong benched vessels, until the sun goes down and the blessed darkens comes over. He spoke, and swift footed Iris did not disobey him, but went down along the hills of Ida to scare Lion, and found the son of wise Priam, Hector the brilliant, standing among the compact chariots and by the horses. Iris, the swift of foot, came close beside and spoke to him. Hector, O son of Priam, and equal of Zeus's counsel, Zeus, my father, has sent me down to tell you this message. As long as you behold Agamemnon, shepherd of the people, raging among the champions and cutting down the ranged fighters, so long hold back from the fighting, but urge on the rest of your people to fight against the enemy through a strong encounter. But when either struck by his spear, hit by flying arrow, he springs up behind his horses. Then Zeus guarantees power to you to kill men, till you make your way to the strong benched vessels, until the sun goes down and the blessed darkens comes over. Swift foot Iris spoke to him thus and went away from him. And Hector in all of his armor leapt to the ground from his chariot, and shaking two sharp spears in his hand, ranged over the whole host, steering them up to fight and waking the ghastly warfare. So they whirled about and stood in their ground against Achaeans, and the Argives against them pulled together their battle lines. So they fighting grew close, and they faced each other. And foremost, Agamemnon drove on, trying to fight far ahead of all their others. I can still read more.
Sing to me now, you muses who hold the halls of Olympus, who was the first to go up against King Agamemnon, who of the Trojans are famous Trojan allies. Iphidamas, the rough and rangy son of Antenor, bred in the fertile land of Thrace, mother of flocks. Cisseus reared him at home when he was little. His mother's father, who sired the fine beauty Theano. But once he hit the stride of his youth and ached for fame, Cisseus tried to hold him back, gave him a daughter's hand, but warm from the bridal chamber marched the groom, fired up by word that Achaea's troops had landed. 12 beaked ships sailed out in his command. Trim vessels he left behind him in Percote, making his way to Troy to fight on foot. And here he came now, up against Agamemnon. Closer, closing. Atrides hurled and missed his spear shaft, just slanting aside the man's flank. As Iphidamas into the blow full weight, trusting his heavy hand, but failed to pierce the glittering belt, failed flat out, the point smashing against the silver, bent back like lead. And seizing the spear shaft, powerful Agamemnon dragged it toward him, tussling like some lion and wrenching it free from Iphidamas's slack grasp. He hacked his neck with a sword and loosed his limbs. And there he dropped and slept the sleep of bronze, poor soldier, striving to help his fellow Trojans, far from his wedded wife, his new bride. No joy had he known from her for all his gifts, the full 100 oxen he gave her on the spot, then promised 1,000 heads of goats and sheep from the boundless herds he'd rounded up himself. Now the son of Atreus stripped him, robbed his corpse, and strode back to his waiting Argive armies, hoisting the gleaming gear. But Kun marked him, Kun, Antenor's eldest son, a distinguished man at arms, and stinging grief went misting down his eyes for his fallen brother. In from the blind side he came. Agamemnon never saw him, tensed with a spear, and slashed him under the elbow, down the forearm, a glint of metal. The point ripped through his flesh, and the lord of fighting men, Atrides, shuddered. Now that he quit the foray even then, he sprang at Kun, gripping his big spear shaft, tough from the gusting wind that whipped its tree. Kun was just dragging his brother foot first, wild now to retrieve his own father's son, calling for help from all the bravest men. But as Kuon hauled the body through the press, Agamemnon lunged up under his bossed shield, thrust home hard with the polished bronze point, unstrung his limbs and reared and lopped his head, and the head tumbled onto his fallen brother's corpse. So then and there, under royal Agamemnon's hands, the two sons of Antenor filled out their fates, and down they plunged to the strong house of death. But the king kept ranging, battling ranks on ranks, and thrusting his spear and sword, and hurling heavy rocks so long as the blood came flowing warm from his wound. But soon as the gash dried and firm clots formed, sharp pain came bursting in on Atrides' strength, spear sharp as the labor pangs that pierce a woman, agonies brought on by the harsh birthing spirits. Hera's daughters who hold the stabbing power of birth, so sharp the throes that burst on Atrides' strength. And back he sprang in the car and told his driver to make for the hollow ships, racked with pain. But he loosed a shrill cry to all his men, "Friends, lords of the Argives, O my captains, your turn now. Keep on shielding our fast ships from this latest mass attack. Zeus, who rules the world, forbids me to battle Trojans all day long." A crack of the lash, and his driver whipped the team with streaming manes straight for the curved ships, and on they flew, holding nothing back, their heaving chests foaming, bellies pelted with dust, rushing the wounded warlord free and clear of battle. There, Hector's signal, seeing Atrides hurt and speeding off the lines, he gave a ringing shout to his troops and allies. "Trojans, Lycians, Dardan fighters, hand to hand. Now be men, my friends. Call up your battle fury. Their best man cuts and runs. Zeus is handing me glory, awesome glory. Drive your horses right at these mighty Argives. Seize the high triumph. Seize it now." Hector, whipping the fight and fire in each man like a huntsman crying on his hounds, their white fangs flashing, harrying savage game, some wild boar or lion. So at Achaea's ranks he drove his fearless Trojans, Hector, son of Priam, a match for murderous Ares. The prince himself went wading into the front lines, his hopes soaring, and down he hurled in the fray like a sudden killer squall that blasts down on the dark blue sea to whip and chop its crests. Who was the first he slaughtered? Who the last? Hector, the son of Priam, now Zeus gave him glory? Asaeus first, Autonous next, and then Opetes, Dolops, Clytius' son, and Opheltius, Agelaus, Asaemonus, and Orus, Hipponaus, staunch in combat. These were the Argive captains Hector killed, then went for the main mast like the west wind, battering soft shining clouds. The south wind wafts along in deep explosive blasts. It strikes and the great swelling waves roll on, and the spray goes shooting up from under the wind's hurl, swerving, roaring down the sea. So wildly Hector routed the packed lines of fighters caught in his onslaught. Now there would have been havoc, irreversible chaos, fleeing bands of Achaeans flung back on their ships, if Odysseus had not shouted out to Diomedes, "What's wrong with us? Forgetting our battle fury? Come here, old friend, stand by me. What humiliation if Hector with that flashing helmet takes our ships." Powerful Diomedes took his challenge quickly. "I'll stand and fight by God and take the worst, but little joy it will bring our comrades now. Zeus, the king of the clouds, has pitched on victory for the Trojans, not for us." But all the same, he hurled Thymbraeus down to ground from his car, from his car. Diomedes speared his left breast as Odysseus killed the warlord's aide in arms, Molion, tall as a god, and left them there for dead. Their fighting finished. Then both went thrashing into the lines to make a slaughter, as two wild boars, bristling, ramping back for the kill, fling themselves on the yelping packs that hunt them. Back they whirled on attack and laid the Trojans low, while Achaeans, just in flight from Hector's onset, leapt at the chance to gather second wind. At once, they took two lords of the realm and seized their car, the two good sons of Merops, out of Pericote harbor. Merops, adept beyond all men in the Mantic arts, he refused to let his two boys march to war, this man-killing war, but the young ones fought him all the way. The forces of Black Death drove them on, and Diomedes, a marvel with the spear, destroyed them both, stripped them of life breath, and tore them gear away. And Odysseus killed Hippodamus, killed Hypericus. And there, gazing down from his ridge on Ida, the son of Cronos stretched the rope of battle tense and taut, as the fighters kept on killing side to side. Diomedes hurled a spear that struck Agastrophus, Paean's warrior son, and smashed the joint of his hip. But his team was not close by for the fast escape. A big mistake, the fool. His driver held them reined off at the side, while he advanced through the front ranks on foot, plowing on till he lost his own life. But Hector quickly marked them across the lines. He charged them both full force with a savage shout, and Trojan battalions churning in his wake, Diomedes shuddered to see him coming on. The lord of the war cry called out to Odysseus quickly, close beside him. We're in for shipwreck, a breaker rolling down on us. Look, this massive Hector, brace for him, stand our ground together, beat him back.
Here comes Hector like a damned avalanche. Let's hold our ground and beat him off. He spoke, poised his long shadowed spear, and cast a good hard shot at Hector's head. The spear point ricocheted off the helmet's rim, bronze off bronze. Apollo had given him this 3-ply crest and never touched his skin. But Hector bounded back an amazing distance and took cover in the crowd. Down on his knees with one hand on the ground, he blanked out for some time, and then while Diomedes was tracking down his spear, revived again, mounted his chariot, and drove off through the throng, escaping a darker fate. Diomedes ran after him while his spear shouting, "Got away again, didn't you, you dog? By the skin of your teeth. Apollo has bailed you out once more. You must be a regular devotee, praying each time you go out. I'll finish you off next time we meet, if I have a god on my side. Meanwhile, let's see who gets my business now." He spoke and proceeded to strip the armor from Agastrophus, but Alexander, Helen's fair-haired lord, was aiming an arrow at the son of Tydeus, bracing himself against a pillar on the tomb of Ilus, a Trojan elder in days gone by. Diomedes had unstrapped the gleaming corset from Agastrophus's torso and was busy removing the shield and heavy helmet, when Paris drew the arrowhead back to the grip, released the shaft, and scored a hit. The armor passing through the instep of Diomedes' right foot and sticking in the ground. Paris laughed, and jumping out of his blind, crowd. You're hit. My arrow didn't miss. I wish it had gone in your gut and killed you, so the Trojans could have some breathing room. They're trembling like goats before a lion. There was no hint of fear in Diomedes' response. You sissy, curling-haired pimp of a bowman, why didn't you come down and fight me man to man, and see how far your bow and arrow get you? Boasting because you scratched my foot? I might as well have been hit by a woman or imbecile child. A weakling's weapon is blunt. When I throw a spear, it kills you on contact. My throw makes it sharp. And your widow's cheeks are torn with grief. Your children are fatherless. Your blood reddens the earth, and you rot, with more birds than women around you. When Diomedes finished, Odysseus stepped in front of him with his spear. Diomedes sat down behind him and pulled the arrow from his foot. The pain was sickening. He limped onto his chariot and told the driver to head for the ships. This left Odysseus alone. Every Greek in the vicinity had fled in fear. Troubled, Odysseus said to no one but himself, "Now what? It will be bad enough if I lose my nerve and run, but worse yet if I am caught here alone, as I will be, since Zeus has scattered all the Danaans. But why am I talking to myself like this? I know only cowards depart from battle. A real warrior stands his ground, whether he is hit or hits another." While he thought it over, the Trojans closed in, encircling their own peril. Dogs and hunters will go after a boar from all sides, and when he comes out of the deep brush, whether his white tusks in his curving jaws, they charge at him. And although the sound of his gnashing tusks inspires sheer terror, they keep coming at him. So too, around Odysseus, dear to Zeus, the Trojans rushed in. Odysseus sprang and hit Diopetus first, coming down with his sharp spear onto his shoulder. Throon and Nomus were no great trouble, and then he stabbed Chersidamus in his navel, under his shield, as he leapt from his chariot. Chersidamus fell and clawed at the dust. Paying these no mind, he put his spear through a man named Charops, whose brother Sacus now came up to help him. Sacus was rich and well-born, a man with equal of a god. He put his face in Odysseus's and said, "So this is Odysseus, who can't get enough of cunning and trouble. Today you will either boast you have killed Hippasus' two sons, or go down yourself under my spear." And he hit the circle of Odysseus' shield with such force that the spear fought its way all the way through, penetrated the metal of the ornamented corselet, and ripped the flesh from the side of his ribs. But Pallas Athena would not let it pierce his inner organs. Odysseus knew, and the wound was not fatal. He pulled back a step and said to Socus, "You're as good as dead, you sorry bastard. You may have put me out of commission, but this is the last day on earth for you. Flattened by my spear, you will give glory to me, and your life to Hades, famed for his horses." This was enough for Socus. He turned to run, but as he was turning, Odysseus rammed his spear between his shoulders and drove it all the way through to his chest. He fell with a thud, and Odysseus exulted. "Ah, Socus, death was too quick for you, and you couldn't dodge it. Your parents will not close your eyes on a bier. No birds will eat your flesh raw, fanning their wings. But if I die, the Greeks will give me burial." So saying, he drew Socus' spear out of his flesh, and from his boss shield, blood spurted out. The pain tore at his heart. The Trojans, watching, signaled each other and advanced in a body. Odysseus gave ground, shouting to his comrades still on the field. Menelaus heard each call and said to Ajax, "Telamonian Ajax, that is Odysseus' shouting." The Trojans must have cut him off. We've got to get over and lend a hand, or the Trojans may overpower him. Think what his loss would mean to the Greeks.
This is Stephen Mitchell's translation from 2011. With these words, he led the way forward, and Ajax went with him. They found Odysseus, and all around him the Trojans were swarming, like jackals who close in around a huge stag that a hunter's arrow has wounded. The stag has escaped, running as long as the warm blood flows and his legs can carry him. But at last his strength is depleted, and he falls in a shadowy grove in the mountains, and soon the jackals tear him to pieces. But some god sends a marauding lion. The jackals scatter in fear, and the lion stands there, feasting upon the carcass. Just so did the Trojans close in on Odysseus from all sides, as constantly lunging and feinting, he kept death at bay. But when Ajax came up, his body shield like a tower, and stood beside him, the Trojans took fright and scattered. And Menelaus grabbed hold of Odysseus' arm and led him out of the fighting, while his attendant drove up his chariot. Ajax rushed forward and killed Doriclus, one of King Priam's bastards, then stabbed Lysander and Pandocus and Piresus and Pilartes. Just as a river swollen by winter rains hurtles down from the mountains, its headlong current tearing up mighty oak and pine trees and sweeping huge piles of driftwood out to the sea. So Ajax swept through the wide plain, slaughtering men and horses. But Hector was unaware of this, since he was fighting on the far left by the banks of the river Scamander, where the carnage was thickest and where an immense, unceasing uproar arose near Idomeneus and Nestor. In this place, Hector was causing great devastation with his spear and chariot, cutting down many young men. Still, the Achaeans would never have yielded before him had Paris not put an end to Machaon's brave feats with a 3-barbed arrow that hit him in his right shoulder. Then the Achaeans were frightened, because they thought that the battle might shift, and he would surely be killed. And quickly Idomeneus turned to Nestor and said, "Son of Neleus, glory of the Achaeans, mount your chariot at once, so that Machaon can climb up beside you and drive to the ships right away. A healer is worth a battalion of men for his skill in cutting out arrows and for his knowledge of herbs." Nestor hurried to follow his comrade's instructions. He mounted his car and carefully helped Machaon, the Argives' great healer, up into it by his side, then touched the whip to the backs of the horses, and gladly they flew to the ships, for their hearts were eager to be there. Cebriones, as he stood in the car with Hector, saw that their troops were being cut down, and he said, "Hector, while we are fighting on the far edge of the battle, the rest of our army is panicking. Ajax is pushing them back. I know him from the huge shield that he is carrying. Hurry, we need to drive to the battle's center, where most men are killing and dying, and where an unceasing uproar fills the whole sky." After he finished speaking, he lashed the horses with his whistling whip, and on hearing the crack, the pair galloped ahead through the thick of the battle, trampling over the bodies and shields of those who had fallen. And the axle below and the chariot rails were splattered with the blood flung up by the horses' hooves and the wheel rims. And Hector tore through the mass of soldiers and plunged into the fighting and caused a terrible panic among the Achaeans and slaughtered many brave men. Now Zeus instilled a great dread in the heart of Ajax, and he stood in a daze and slung his huge oxhide shield over his back, and glancing around like a wild beast, began to retreat, constantly looking backward and moving little by little, step by short step, just as a lion is driven off from a stockyard by dogs and farmers who stay up all night to prevent him from killing the pick of the herd. Now, greedy for flesh, he charges ahead, but in vain. A volley of spears falls all around him. Blazing torches approach, and he backs off, frightened, although he still longs to break in. And at dawn he goes slinking away with a sullen heart. So Ajax backed off from the Trojans, sullen at heart and against his will, since he feared for the Argive ships. And that's when a donkey is led by some boys down a road, a stubborn beast on whom many sticks have been broken, and they pass a field, and his strength is too much for the boys, and he willfully turns in to ravage the high-standing grain. And although they beat him with sticks, their strength is too feeble. They manage to drive him out with much effort, and only when he has eaten his fill. Just so did the Trojans keep crowding Ajax and thrusting at him with their spears. He would sometimes resist, and with a tremendous effort, wheel around and keep all the soldiers at bay. And then, once more, he would turn in retreat. Thus, standing midway between the Trojans and the Achaeans, he single-handedly stopped the advance to the ships. Some of the enemy's spears bit into his shield, but many spears, hungry to glut themselves on his flesh, stuck in the ground before they could ever reach him. And when Eurypylus saw him attacked by the thick barrage of missiles, he came up and stood beside him and aimed his bright spear and let it fly. And it hit Apisaon, son of Phaeacius, in the belly and pierced his liver. At once he crumpled to earth, and Eurypylus charged and began to strip off his armor. But when Paris saw him, he hit him in the right thigh with an arrow. The shaft snapped off, and great pain shot through him. And he moved back into the crowd to escape destruction and called with a mighty shout that moved all who heard him. "My friends, commanders and captains of the Achaeans, quickly now, make a stand. Help me save Ajax. He is fighting alone. Spears and arrows are raining upon him. I do not think he can survive like this. So hurry, come to his rescue and save him." And when they heard Eurypylus say this, they came and rallied around him, leaning their shields on their shoulders and holding their spears out. Ajax made his way toward them, then turned and took a firm stand when he reached his comrades. And so they continued to fight like a blazing fire. Meanwhile, the mares of Neleus, drenched with sweat, brought Nestor out of the battle along with Machaon. Achilles saw them come in as he stood on the stern of his huge ship, watching the slaughter and the retreat. And quickly he said to his dear companion Patroclus, "Noble son of Menoetius, joy of my heart, now the Achaeans will have to come here and beg me to return to the fighting. Look how dire their need is. But hurry and go to Nestor and ask him who this man is that he is bringing out of the battle. From behind, he looks just like the healer Machaon, but I'm not sure. The horses were galloping past me at such a great speed that I couldn't see the man's face." Patroclus was quick to do what his comrade had asked and set out running briskly alongside the ships. When those two at last arrived at the hut of Nestor, they stepped from the chariot onto the bountiful earth, and Nestor's attendant Eurymedon unyoked the horses, and the two men stood in the breeze by the seashore, drying the sweat from their tunics. Then they went into the hut, and a beautiful woman named Hecamede prepared a drink for them. Nestor had won her at Tenedos when Achilles took and plundered it. She was the daughter of Arsinoe. The Achaeans had singled her out as a prize for the old hero, since he was always the most astute among them at planning their battles. First, she pushed up a beautiful polished table with feet of dark blue enamel, and on it she placed a bronze dish with an onion as spice for the drink, and golden honey and barley cakes, and beside them a glorious cup that Nestor had brought from home. It was studded with golden rivets and had 4 handles, and on top of each of them 2 golden doves were feeding. Most other men would not have been able to lift it when it was full, but Nestor, old as he was, could easily pick it up. In this cup, the woman poured them some Pramnian wine, upon which she grated goat cheese with a bronze grater and sprinkled white barley. And when the mixture was ready, she urged them to drink. Once they had drunk and quenched their extreme thirst, and after they had begun to speak to each other, Patroclus appeared in the doorway, a godlike man. Nestor saw him and rose from his chair and led him in by the hand and invited him to sit down. But Patroclus stood there, declining the invitation. "This is no time for sitting, my lord. He is proud and may take offense if I linger, the one who sent me. He told me to find out whom you have brought here wounded, but now I can see for myself that it is Machaon. I will go back and tell Achilles. You understand how terrifying a man he can be, my lord. He might be quick to blame even one who is blameless." Then Nestor responded, "Why is Achilles suddenly concerned about who has been wounded? He can't imagine the grief that we are all feeling now. Our best men are lying in pain inside their huts. Diomedes has been shot by an arrow. Odysseus and Agamemnon have been stabbed. And this man, whom I just brought in from the fighting, he too has been shot by a Trojan or Lycian arrow. Yet Achilles, great warrior though he is, has no pity for the Danaans. Is he waiting till we are helpless and our ships have begun to light up with enemy flames and all of us are cut down one after the other? And what can I do? I am not what I used to be. If only I were as young and strong as I was when a quarrel broke out between the Achaeans and us over a raid. I killed Itomenius, then the son of Hipparchus, from the city of Elis. I was riding off with the herds we had seized in reprisal, and when he attempted to stop me, I threw a spear and hit him as he was galloping up to his men. He fell to the ground and his comrades rode off in terror. We rounded up a magnificent haul, 50 herds of cattle, and that many flocks of sheep, and that many droves of pigs, and that many wide-ranging herds of goats, and 150 bay horses, all of them mares, many with foals still suckling. At night, we drove them into the city of Pylos, and Neleus rejoiced that I had taken so much, though I was a young man out on my first campaign. The next day at dawn, the heralds proclaimed that any man who was owed a debt in Elis should come, and the leaders of the Pylians gathered together and divided the spoils. The Achaeans owed a great deal to many of us, since we in Pylos were few and greatly weakened. Heracles years before had sapped our strength by killing all our best men. Neleus had had 12 sons, and I was the only one who was left. My 11 brothers had died. Emboldened by this, the Achaeans began to plunder our farmlands, and they grew constantly more aggressive. Now from the spoils, Neleus, my father, chose a herd of cows and a large flock of sheep, 300, with their shepherds as well. For he too was owed a great debt, 4 swift prize-winning horses along with their car, which had gone to the games at Elis to run in a race with a tripod as prize. But Augeas, king of men, had kept them there and sent back their driver, heartsick for his horses, and also sent an insulting message. Neleus, still angry, took many spoils for himself, but he gave the rest to the people. As we were dealing with this, and throughout the city we were offering sacrifices to all the gods, on the 3rd day the Achaeans attacked with a large force, galloping in with great speed, among them the twins Cteas and Eurytus, sons of Actor, who in those days were still boys, untested in battle. There is a steep hill town called Troyessa, above the river Alpheus, at the far edge of Pylos. This town they besieged. They were eager to take it, and they ravaged the plain. But Athena came down to warn us, hurrying in the night from Olympus, proclaiming that we must prepare for war, and she raised an army of Pylians who were eager to fight. My father forbade me to go into battle. He hid my horses and said that I was too inexperienced in warfare. Nevertheless, with Athena's help, I surpassed all the charioteers, though I was on foot. The stream Menneus empties into the sea near Arene. Here the Pylian horsemen and I waited for dawn, when the ranks of foot soldiers flowed in. From there we marched with all speed in our full armor, and by midday we reached the Alpheus. There we offered a magnificent sacrifice to Almighty Zeus, and then a bull to Alpheus and one to Poseidon, and to Athena a cow that had never been yoked. and we all ate the sacred meal in our battalions, then lay down to sleep by the river with every man wearing his war gear. Meanwhile, the Achaeans had surrounded the city, determined to overrun it. But before they could, we forced them into a battle. When the sun came up and shone above the horizon, we prayed to Zeus and Athena, then we attacked. I was the first to kill a man in the fighting and take his horses. Mulius' son-in-law to King Augeas, wed to his eldest daughter, golden-haired Agamede, who knew the secrets of every healing herb that the wide earth bears. As he was charging, I brought him down with a spear thrust. He fell to the ground, and I jumped up onto his car and took my place in the front ranks, and the Achaeans panicked and fled, scattering every which way. When they saw him fall, their captain and bravest man, I charged at them in my fury like a black whirlwind, and I captured 50 chariots, and from each one, 2 warriors bit the earth, cut down by my spear. And now I would even have killed the twin sons of Actor if their true father, Poseidon the Earthshaker, hadn't veiled them in mist and carried them out of the battle. Well, Lord Zeus gave us the victory on that day, and we chased them across the plain, and we killed the men and gathered their armor till we had driven our horses to Buprasium and Olenian Rock and the hill of Alesion, where Athena turned back our army. And after I killed my last man and left him, our troops drove their chariots back to Pylos, where all gave glory to Zeus among gods, among men to Nestor, that is, who I once used to be, if that life was ever real. But Achilles' bravery, far from profiting others, profits only himself. And soon, I think, he will shed bitter tears when his comrades have been cut to pieces and it is too late to save them. Dear friend, Menoetius gave you some good advice on the day that he sent you from Phthia to Agamemnon. Odysseus and I were present then, and we heard it. We had come to the house of Peleus on our journey to gather an army all through the land of Achaea. There we found Menoetius, your honored father, and you and Achilles, and the old warrior Peleus was burning to Zeus a bull's thigh bones wrapped in its fat, out in the courtyard holding a golden cup, and pouring out drops of wine as the sacrifice blazed. You two were carving the meat, and when we arrived and stood in the gateway, Achilles leaped up, astonished, and led us in by the hand and told us to sit, and he set before us all that a guest could wish for. And when we had taken our pleasure in eating and drinking, I spoke to you both and urged you to come to the war. You were both eager to do so, and your fathers gave you much good advice. Old Peleus told Achilles always to be the bravest above all others, and your father, Menoetius, gave you these wise instructions. My child, Achilles is nobler than you by birth, and he is far stronger than you are, but you are the elder, and your role is to advise him with sensible words, and he will listen and profit from what you tell him. That was your father's message, which you have forgotten. But even now, you might speak like this to Achilles in the hope that you might get him to change. Who knows? If all goes well, you might move his heart with your words, since a dear friend's advice can be a powerful thing. But if some heavenly sign has been holding him back, some prophecy from Zeus that his mother has brought him, then let him at least send you out, and let the rest of the Myrmidons follow, and you can be a great light to all the Argives. And let him give you his armor to wear into battle. The Trojans will take you for him and hold off from fighting, and then we can catch our breath, worn down as we all are. You and your men are fresh, and the Trojans exhausted. You could soon drive them back to the walls of their city, away from our ships and huts. Finish. These were his words, and they made Patroclus' heart beat faster, and he went running along the shore to Achilles. But when he came to Odysseus' ships, where the place of assembly was, and the public tribunal, and the altars built to the gods, Eurypylus met him. He was limping out of the battle. The sweat streamed from his head and shoulders, and out of his painful wound the dark blood gushed. Though his spirit was firm, Patroclus felt pity for him and said with tears in his eyes, "You wretched commanders and captains of the Achaeans, you are fated, it seems, to feed the wild dogs of Troy with your white flesh, far from your friends and your own dear country. But tell me, Eurypylus, is there a chance that we will still be able to hold back Hector's fierce onslaught, or will we be slaughtered today by his terrible spear?" Eurypylus said, "No longer, my lord Patroclus, does our army have any hope of avoiding that fate. There is no choice now but to die beside the black ships. All those who before this have been our best fighters are lying inside their huts in great pain, wounded by arrows or spears, and Hector's power keeps growing. But at least you can help me. Take me back to my ship. Cut the arrowhead out of my thigh and wash off the blood with warm water and spread herbs onto the wound. They say you have learned the use of them from Achilles, who was taught by Chiron, the most humane of the centaurs. As for Machaon and Podalirius, our healers, the first is lying in pain in his hut, in desperate need himself of a capable healer, while the other is still on the battlefield under attack." And Patroclus said to Eurypylus, "How did we get caught in such a position? What should we do? I have been sent to deliver an urgent message from Nestor, our eminent counselor, to Achilles. Still, I won't abandon you here in your trouble." With these words, he grasped his comrade around the waist and walked him back to his hut. And when his attendant saw him, he spread some ox hides for him on the ground. And Patroclus had him lie down, and with a sharp knife, he cut the arrowhead out of his thigh. And he washed off the blood with warm water, and taking a bitter root, he crushed it between his hands, and then applied it to the gashed flesh. And it took away all his pain, and the wound began to dry up, and the blood stopped flowing. End of book 11, book 12.
While Patroclus doctored Eurypylus, the battle raged on. The Greeks still had the protection of their trench and the wide wall above it they had built as the last line of defense for their ships for the time being. When they built that wall and drove the trench around it to protect their ships and all their plunder, they neglected to offer formal sacrifice to the immortal gods. Built against the will of the immortals, the will could not endure for long. While Hector lived and Achilles raged, and the city of Priam was still unpillaged, the great wall of the Greeks stood firm. But when all the best Trojans had died, and many Greeks had fallen or had left, and after 10 years Priam's city had fallen and the Greeks had sailed back to their native land, then Poseidon and Apollo conspired to sweep away the wall, bringing against it the might of all the rivers that flow down from Ida's mountains to the sea. Rhesus and Heptaporus, Carasus and Rhodius, Granicus and Aesopus, shining Scamander and Simois, along the banks of which many bull-hide shields and helmets fell in the dust, and a generation of men who were half divine. Phoebus Apollo turned all their mouths together, and for 9 days sent their flood against the wall. Zeus poured down rain continually, the sooner to wash the wall into the sea. The Earthshaker led the way, holding a trident in his hands, and pushed into the waves all the foundations of beams and stones the Greeks had laid with toil. He made all smooth along the mighty Hellespont, and again covered the great shore with sand. The wall was gone. He turned the beautiful rivers back to flow in their original channels. This Poseidon and Apollo were to do in time to come. But now the battle raged on both sides in the well-built wall. Both sides of the well-built wall. The beams rang as they were struck, and the Greeks, whipped back by Zeus, were penned in with their ships, terrified of Hector, who had engineered the rout and who still fought like a howling wind. When hunters are out with their dogs, their prey, a wild boar or a lion, will suddenly feel its strength and turn. the men close to their ranks like a wall, and throw their javelins thick and fast. But the valiant animal stands its ground, and though its bravery will be its death, it charges the ranks of men, testing them, and where it charges, the men fall back. Hector kept urging his troops to cross the ditch. His horses stood at its edge, whinnying, but would not advance, spooked by the trench, too broad to leap and too difficult to drive over. The banks hung over the sides, and sharp stakes were planted in the farther, higher edge. A formidable obstacle for a horse and chariot, but the foot soldiers were eager to give it a try. To that end, Polydamas drew up to Hector and said, "Hector, and Trojan commanders all, it's not very smart of us to drive our horses across this trench, not with those sharp stakes set in it, and the Greek wall just a little beyond. There's not enough space to dismount and fight, and we'll suffer heavy casualties if we try. If the high lord of thunder has turned against them, and it is his will to help the Trojans, I would gladly see the Argives blotted out. But if they rally and we have to retreat and crash into the ditch, there won't be a man left, even to bring the news back to the city. So this is what I say we should do. Let the squires hold the horses by the trench, while the rest of us advance on foot in full armor, massed behind Hector. The Greeks will not withstand us if the noose is tight around them." It was sound advice, and Hector took it. He vaulted to the ground in his armor, and other Trojans followed his example. They instructed their drivers to keep the horses in good order by the ditch. The troops divided into 5 companies behind their commanders. Hector and Polydamas stood at the head of the 2 largest contingents, elite troops eager to break the wall and fight by the ships. Cebriones joined them in command. Hector stationed a lesser man with his chariot. The second command was led by Paris, along with Agenor and Alcathos. Helenus and Deiphobus, son of Priam, led the third contingent, joined by Asius, Hyrtacus's son, whose huge stallions brought him from Arisbe and the river Selleis. Aeneas led the fourth contingent, Anchises' son with the son of Antenor, Archilochus and Acamas as his lieutenants. Sarpedon commanded the allies, and picked Glaucus and Asteropaeus as his lieutenants, judging them to be the best next to himself. Sarpedon knew no peer. Massed behind their leather shields, the Trojans attacked, confident that nothing could stop them now from falling on the black ships. All of them followed Polydamas' strategy, except for Asius. This man, Hyrtacus' son, had no intention of leaving his horses behind with his squire, but chariot and all drove toward the ships, and to his fate, never in his glory as charioteer, to drive back to windy Ilion again with his proud horses. No, his destiny lay on the bronze point of Idomeneus' spear, making for the left wing of the beachhead camp, where the Greeks returning from battle entered with their horses and cars. Asius drove up to the wide gate and found the doors, not yet shut and barred, but held open by men whose comrades were still returning from battle. Asius drove straight for the gates, followed by his howling soldiers, confident that no Greek could keep them from the black ships now. This was all childishness, for at the gates they found 2 of Greece's finest warriors. Lapith spearmen, one a son of Perithous, Polypoetes by name, and the other Leonteus, a match for brutal Ares himself. They were like a pair of oaks planted before the high gates, these 2, trees that withstand wind and rain day after day with roots deep and strong. They met Asius' charge without a tremor, these 2 Lapiths, trusting the strength of their hands to beat off not only Asius, but all his men too, who were lifting their leather shields high around their warlord and his captains. Iamenus and Orestes and Adamas, who was Asius' son, Thaon and Oinomeus, The Lapiths had been inside for some time, rousing the Greeks to fight in defense of their ships. But when they saw the Trojans attacking the wall and the Greeks in loud retreat, they rushed out to fight in front of the gate. They fought like a pair of wild boars, holding off men and dogs in the mountains. Slanting in, they slashed through trees, cutting them off at the root, and the clashing noise of their tusks rise above the general tumult until someone gets lucky with a spear. The polished bronze clashed on the Lapith's chest as they took hits face on from the enemy. They fought strongly, confident in their might and in the support from those on the wall above who rained down stones from the fortifications in defense of their own lives, their huts, and their seafaring ships. The stones fell like snow, down to the ground, falling like flakes. A cold wind from the shadowy clouds drives thick and fast upon the bountiful earth. Not only stones, but everything that is thrown by men in war. A steady stream of missiles flowed from the hands of Greeks and Trojans alike. Helmets and embossed shields rang hoarsely like bells struck by rough stones. And Asius, son of Hyrtacus, groaned, smacked his thighs, and like a man who has been wronged, spoke. Father Zeus, or shall I call you the arch-deceiver? I never thought the Greeks had a chance against us. They're like a swarm of wasps or bees holed up in a hive they have built near a trail through cliffs and defending their young against hunters. These men, even though they are only two, will not yield the gate until they kill or are killed. These words had no effect upon the mind of Zeus, who had decided to give all the glory to Hector. Other battles were being fought around the other gates. Even if I were a god, I could not tell you all. Suffice it to say, there was a firestorm of stone all around the wall, that the Greeks were hard-pressed to defend their ships, and that those gods who abetted the Greeks were sorely distressed. Over on the left, the Lapiths were fighting. Polypoetes and Perithous, his son, threw his spear through the bronze cheek piece of Damas's helmet. The point splintered the bone and scrambled the gray stuff inside. He had been eager to fight. Polypoetes killed Pylon and Ormenius next. Leonteus, meanwhile, was doing his own damage, hitting Hippomachus in the belt with his spear, then darting through the crowd with sword drawn and stabbing Antiphates in close fighting, sending him sprawling backward down the ground. Then, in order, he brought Menon, Iamenos, and Orestes down to earth's bounty. While the Lapiths stripped their victims bronze, the troops with Hector and Polydamas, for all their numbers and valor and their eagerness to break through the wall and fight by the ships, hesitated on the brink of the trench, paralyzed by an omen, an eagle overhead that skirted their front lines from right to left, clutching in its talons a huge scarlet snake, still alive and with plenty of fight left. Curling around, the snake struck at the eagle just below its neck, and in a spasm of pain, the great bird dropped it in the Trojan ranks and flew off shrieking on a blast of wind. The soldiers shuddered at the glistening coils lying in their midst. A portent from heaven, Polydamas turned to Hector and said, Hector, you always lay into me in assembly, even when I give sound advice, since it will not do for a man of the people to cross you in council or in battle instead of adding to your strength. Even so, I will speak now as seems best to me. We should not fight the Danaans for their ships. It will turn out for us just as with this bird that came to the Trojans as they were eager to cross. It skirted their front lines from right to left, clutching in its talons a huge scarlet snake, but then it fell before reaching its nest and never brought it home to give to its young. It will be the same with us, even if our forces break through the Greek wall and its gates and the enemy falls back, we will find ourselves beating a disorderly retreat from the ships and leaving behind us many Trojans killed by the Achaeans in defense of their ships. This is how a soothsayer would respond, one who knows omens well and has the people's trust. Hector's bronze mask leaned toward Polydamas. I don't like the way you're talking now. You know how to speak better than this, but if you really mean what you say, the gods themselves must have addled your wits, telling me to ignore what thundering Zeus has assented to and held out to me. Birds? You want me to obey birds, Polydamas? I don't care which way birds fly, right to the sunrise or left into the dusk. All we have to do is obey great Zeus, Lord of mortals and immortals alike. One omen is best, to fight for your country. Why should you be afraid of combat? Even if all the rest of us are killed at the Argive ships, you will be safe, since you don't have an ounce of fight in you. But if I catch you holding back from battle or talking anybody else out of fighting, you lose your life on the point of my spear. And he led them across the trench. To the noise of their advance, Zeus now added a wind from Ida's mountains that blew dust straight at the ships and the bewildered Greeks. The sky god was giving the glory to the Trojans and to Hector. Trusting these portents and their own strength, the Trojans did their best to breach the wall. Pulling down pickets and battlements, they threw them to the ground and set to work prying up the huge beams the Greeks had used to reinforce the wall. They were dragging these out, hoping to topple the entire structure, but even then the Greeks refused to give way, patching the battlements with bullhide and beating off the invaders. Both Ajaxes were on the wall patrolling it and urging on the troops using harsh words, gentle words, whatever it took to get the men back into fighting. Friends, and I mean everyone from heroes to camp followers, no one ever said men are equal in war. There is work for us all. You know it yourselves. I don't want a single man to return to the ships now that you have heard the rallying cry. Keep the pressure on. Olympian Zeus may still grant us to drive the enemy back to the city. And they roused the Greeks to battle. Snow flurries fall thick on a winter's day when Zeus in his cunning rouses himself to slow humans, the ammunition he has. He lulls the winds and he snows and snows until he has covered all the mountaintops, headlands and meadows, and men's plowed fields. And the snow falls over the harbors and the shores of the gray sea, and only the waves keep it off. The rest of the world is enveloped in the winter tempest of Zeus. The stones flew thick upon the Trojans and upon the Greeks, and the wooden wall was beaten like a drum along its whole length. For all this, though, Hector and his Trojans would never have broken the barred gate, had not Zeus roused his own son, Sarpedon, against the Greeks as a lion against cattle. Sarpedon had before him a perfect shield, its broken skin hammered smooth by the smith, who had stitched the leather beneath with gold all around the rim. Holding his shield and brandishing 2 spears, Sarpedon advanced. The mountain lion has not fed for days and is hungry and brave enough to enter the stone sheep pen and attack the flocks. Even if he finds herdsmen on the spot with dogs and spears to protect the fold, he will not be driven back without a try, and either he leaps in and seizes a sheep or is killed by a spear, as human heroes are. Godlike Sarpedon felt impelled to rush the wall and tear it down. He turned to Glaucus and said, Glaucus, you know how you and I have the best of everything in Lycia. Seats, cuts of meat, full cups, everybody looking at us as if we were gods, not to mention our estates on the Xanthus, fine orchards and riverside wheat fields. Well, now we have to take our stand at the front, where all the best fight and face the heat of battle, so that many an armored Lycian will say, so they're not inglorious after all, our Lycian lords who eat fat sheep and drink the sweetest wine. No, they're strong and fight with our best. Ah, my friend, if you and I could only get out of this war alive and then be immortal and ageless all of our days, I would never again fight among the foremost or send you into battle where men win glory. But as it is, death is everywhere, in more shapes than we can count. And since no mortal is immune or can escape, let's go forward, either to give glory to another man or get glory from him. Thus Glaucus nodded, and the two of them moved out at the head of a great nation of Lycians. Menestheus, Peteos' son, saw them and shuddered, for they were advancing toward his part of the wall and bringing ruin with them. Menestheus looked along the wall for a Greek captain who would be able to avert this disaster. He saw both Ajaxes, who never seemed to tire, and Teucer, who had just come from his hut. They were near enough, but there was no way to make a shout reach them with all the noise filling the air the crash of shields and helmets, and the pounding on the gates, which were all closed now, and before each one of which the enemy stood, trying their best to break them and enter. So Menestheus turned to the herald Theotes. Run, Theotes, and call Ajax, or better yet, call both of them. All hell is going to break loose here. The Lycian leaders are bearing down on us, and they've been awfully tough in the big battles. If the fighting is too heavy for them both to come, at least get Telamonion, Ajax here, and Teucer too, who is good with a bow. And the herald was off, running along the wall until he came to the two Ajaxes, to whom he said, My lords, Ajax, captains of the Achaeans, the son of Peteos, nurtured of Zeus, birds, you come make a stand. Bids you come make a stand, however briefly, in the battle there. Both of you would be best, since all hell is going to break loose there. The Lycian leaders are bearing down on us, and they've been awfully tough in big battles. If the fighting is too heavy for both of you to leave, at least let Telamon Ajax come, and Teucer too, who is good with a bow. Telamon Ajax heard the herald out and said this to his Oilean counterpart. Yeah, right. I can finish it.
Just go to another.
Sure. Ajax said, no, Telamon said, Ajax, stay here with Lycomedes and keep these Danaans in the fight. I'm going to make a stand over there. When I've helped them, and I'll come back here. Big Ajax left, and with him Teucer, his natural brother, and Pandion, who carried Teucer's curved bow. Moving along the inside of the wall, they came to Menestheus' sector, and to men hard pressed. The Lycians were swarming up the battlements like black wind. The Greeks pushed back with a shout, and the combat that ensued, it was Telamonian Ajax who first killed his man. Sarpedon's comrade Epicles hitting him with a jagged piece of marble that lay on top of the heap of stones inside the wall there. You couldn't find a man alive now who could lift that stone with both hands, but Ajax swung it high and hurled it with enough force to shatter the four-horned helmet and crush Epicles' skull inside. He fell as if he were doing a high dive from the wall, and his spirit left his bones. Then Teucer hit a fast-charging Glaucus with an arrow when he saw his arm exposed. This stopped him cold, and he leapt back from the wall, hiding his wound from Greek eyes and his pride from their taunts. It pained Sarpedon to see Glaucus withdraw, but it didn't take away from his fight. He hit Alcmaeon, son of Thestor, with his spear, jabbed it in, and as he pulled it out again, Alcmaeon came forward with it, falling head first and landing with a clatter on finely tooled bronze. Sarpedon wrapped his hands around the battlement and pulled. The whole section gave way, exposing the wall above and making an entrance for many.
Aias and Tecaros aimed at him together, and Tecaros hit him with an arrow in a shining belt that encircled his chest to hold the man covering shield. But Zeus brushed there besides the ship's sterns, and Aias, plunging upon him, stabbed at the shield, but the spearhead did not pass clean through. Still he pounded him back in his fury, so that he gave him back a little space from the battlement, and yet not utterly gave way, since his heart was still hopeful of winning glory. He whirled about and called aloud of godlike Lycians, why do you thus let go of furious valor? It is hard thing for me, strong as I am, to break down the wall single-handed and open a path to the vessels. Come on with me. Then this work is better if many do it. So he spoke, and they awed and reproach off the leader. But the pressure of more weight around the Lord of Councils and on the other side of Argives stiffened their battle lions inside the wall, and huge fight developed between the two sides, for neither could the powerful Lycians break the rampart of Danaus, and so open a path through the vessels. Nor had the Danaan spearmen strength to push back the Lycians from rampart once they had won to the place close under it. But as two men with measuring ropes in their hand fight bitterly about boundary line at the meeting place of two cornfields, and the two of them fight in straight place over the rights of division. So the battlements held these armies apart, and across them they hewed at each other, and at the ox hide shields strong circled, guarding men's chest at the fluttering straps of the guards' skin. Many were torn in their white flesh by bronze without pity. Whenever one of the fighters turning aside laid bare his back, and many were struck with a spear carried clean through the shield. Everyone, the battlements had the base station where awash with the men's blood shed from both sides, Achaean and Trojan. But even so, they could not drive panic among the Achaeans, but held evenly as the scales with the careful window holds, taking it by the balance beam, and weighs her wool evenly at either end, working to win pitiful wage for her children. So the battles fought by both sides were pulled fast and even until that time when Zeus gave the greater glory to Hector, Priam's son, who was the first to break into the wall. Achaeans lifted his voice and called a piercing cry to the Trojans. Rise up, Trojans, breakers of horses, and wreck ramparts of the archives, and let loose of inhuman fire on their vessels. So he spoke, driving them on, and they all gave him an ear to him, and steered against the wall in pack, and at once gripping still the edged spears caught and swarmed up the wall's project. Meanwhile, Hector snatched up a stone that stood before the gates. As he carried it along, it was blunt mast at the base, but the upper end was sharp. Two men, the best in all community, could not easily hoist it up from the ground to a wagon of men, such as men are now, but he alone lifted and shook it and as the son of devising Kronos made it light for him, as when he shepherd easily carries the fleece of weather picking it up with one hand and a little burden weighing him. So Hector, lifting the stone, carried it straight for the door leaves, which filled the gateway ponderously closed, fitted together. These were high and twofold, and double door bars on the inside. These were high and twofold, a double door bars in the inside, overlapping each other, closed it, and a single pin bolt secured them. He came and stood very close, and taking a strong, wide stance through at the middle, leaving he through that the cast might not lack force, and smashed the hinds at either side, and the stone crashed ponderously in, and the gates groaned deep, and the door bars could not hold what, but the leaves were smashed to wreckage of the splinters under the stone's impact. Then glorious Hector burst in, with dark face like sudden night, but he shone with ghastly glitter of bronze that gritted his skin and carried 2 spears. In his hand, no one could have stood up against him and stopped him, except the gods. When he burst in the gates and his eyes flashed fire, whirling, he called out across the battle and the Trojans to climb over the walls, and they obeyed his urgency. Immediately, some swarmed over the wall, while others swept in through the wrong gateways, and Danaus scattered in terror among their hollow ships, and clamor and sense rose up. End of Book 12.
Thank you for taking us out, Charlie, with Book 12. We will be back tomorrow after a more substantial break and see you tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Tomorrow we will also have a discussion when we finish Book 24. Anybody who's here with questions they would like to ask, we'd be happy to have a conversation about that. So we'd like to thank all who participated here in Canals 3502 and those of you who have been watching over the internet. Pleasure having you here, and we will resume tomorrow at 11 a.m. Thank you.